A scream tore through the morning mist, sharp, guttural, and too human to be mistaken for anything else. It echoed across the Montana hills, chasing silence off the ridgelines. Caleb Walker froze mid-swing, his axe paused above the half-split log. He listened. No second cry followed. The wind stirred the dry grass. Nothing more. But years on the frontier and blood-soaked battlefields had taught Caleb something few men learned and even fewer survived to remember: when a sound like that cuts through stillness, it leaves a scar. He slung his coat over his shoulder, holstered his revolver, and stepped into the pale light. His boots crunched over frozen ground as he crossed the pasture, the breath from his nostrils hanging in small clouds. The sun had yet to rise, but the fog had begun to lift, revealing long, thin trails etched into the frost like veins across a dead man's hand. He found the body by a rocky outcrop. Not dead, not yet. A man, native by the look of him, lay curled at an angle that spoke of pain and exhaustion. A broken arrow jutted from his side, embedded deep beneath the ribcage. Blood had crusted around the wound, but the smell of iron still clung to the air. Caleb scanned the area. No signs of struggle, no scattered gear, no pursuers. The man hadn't been caught. He had come here. Collapsing in silence, swallowed by the land. The wounded man stirred faintly. His eyes flickered open, just enough to register Caleb's presence. Then they closed again. Caleb hesitated. 10 years alone on this land had taught him not to get involved. But something deeper, a buried instinct, worn but not lost, moved in him. He grunted, knelt, and heaved the stranger across his shoulders. The man didn't cry out. He didn't have the strength. The trip back to the ranch was wordless. Caleb said nothing. The man, barely conscious, gripped the saddle horn with surprising steadiness, as if to say, "I'm not done yet." Back at the barn, Caleb worked in silence. Boiling water. Whiskey for the pain, though the man didn't drink it. Strips of old linen soaked in heat. The arrow came out clean, but the blood ran fast. Hot. Caleb pressed hard against the wound. "Don't you go dying in my house," he muttered, not kindly, not gently. It was less a plea than a command. Near dawn, the man still hadn't woken, but he was breathing steady and deep. Caleb slumped in a chair beside the fire, his eyes closed, not from sleep, but habit. The scream from earlier still rang in his ears. When the first sunlight bled across the frost, Caleb stepped out onto the porch. There, in the snow, were footprints. Small, bare, delicate. Not his, and not the stranger's. Someone else had come in the night, and they'd left without a sound. Caleb didn't sleep that night. Not truly. He sat beside the fire, eyes half closed, but ears attuned to every creak of the wood, every shift in the wind. The stranger in his spare cot didn't stir, his breath shallow but steady. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it a tension Caleb hadn't felt in years. By sunrise, the tracks in the snow had faded into slush. Whatever barefoot visitor had come in the night had left no other sign. No knock, no fire, not even a stolen biscuit from the cupboard. Just the prints, like a whisper across the threshold. He stepped outside, mug of black coffee steaming in his hand, and scanned the pasture. They were already there. 5 figures on horseback moved slowly across the open field, silhouettes in the lifting mist. They rode with the confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going and exactly who they would find. Caleb didn't move from the porch. He sipped his coffee, watched, waited. The riders drew closer, women, all of them. Different ages, different frames, but sharing the same quiet strength in their posture. Their clothes were worn but well kept, saddlebags tied with purpose. Not drifters, not beggars. They dismounted in practiced silence. One of them, a tall woman with thick gray streaks in her hair, stepped forward. She looked Caleb in the eye and gave a nod that felt neither deferential nor defiant. "You pulled our father out of the earth," she said. "We've come to hold up what's left of him." Caleb blinked. "He's still alive. For now." She didn't ask permission to stay. None of them did. They moved past him like they already belonged. One led her horse toward the barn, another toward the shed. The youngest of the group, barely more than a girl, slipped inside the house without a word, her boots silent on the wood floor. Caleb didn't protest. Not with words, not even with posture. He simply stood there, coffee cooling in his hand, watching as his world so long silent, filled with the purposeful rustling of strangers who didn't act like strangers. Later, as dusk rolled in, the barn smelled of straw and heat again. Someone had lit the stove in the kitchen, and the scent of root vegetables and smoked fat floated through the walls. The man in the cot moaned softly, as if the warmth itself tugged him toward consciousness. Caleb sat on the porch as the sun set. The girl, the youngest, appeared beside him, barefoot on the old floorboards. She held out something small, a carved pendant made of bone. "He made this when he thought he was dying," she said. "Told us to bring it to the one who pulled the arrow." And Caleb took it without a word. He didn't look at her, didn't ask her name, but he slipped the pendant into his pocket, fingers closing around it tight. From the barn, someone was humming. In that moment, for the first time in a decade, Caleb realized he was no longer the only heartbeat in the house. By the third day, Caleb's house no longer smelled like dust and firewood. The scent of broth and lye soap filled the corners, and the thrum of life crept back into the hollow timbers. No one said much. No one needed to. The women went about the place like they'd known it before it was his. Caleb hadn't asked their names. They hadn't offered them. They moved with unspoken rhythm, hauling water from the creek, patching leaks in the barn roof, sorting through broken tools in the shed. They didn't ask permission to use the hammer, to mend the broken gate, to gather the chickens back into a proper pen. It was as if the ranch itself had called them, and they'd answered. He didn't interfere, but he watched. Watched as the eldest, who he had come to think of simply as Ma, walked the fence lines, knuckles brushing the wire like she was measuring old injuries. Watched as the tall, quiet one with the keen eyes took inventory of his feed barrels like she'd once run a cavalry supply chain. Watched as the youngest Asha, someone had finally called her, brushed his horses with such tender certainty, the animals nickered at her presence like she was part of the herd. Caleb stood on the porch that evening, a cup of water in his hands, and felt it, the subtle shifting of his domain. The place was still his, but it was no longer only his. Inside, the wounded man stirred. He hadn't spoken a word since Caleb brought him in, but he breathed deeper now. Asha checked on him often. She never said much, but the way her hand lingered near his meant something Caleb didn't fully understand. Near sundown, she approached him with a bowl of something: hot beans, salt pork, roots he didn't recognize. "You haven't eaten," she said simply. "I eat when I'm hungry," he replied, but he took the bowl anyway. She didn't leave, just stood there, arms folded. "You're not asking questions," she said. "Not the asking kind. That's why we came." He looked at her, then really looked. Her face was young, but not soft. It bore the marks of distance, of places where names didn't matter and faces didn't last. Her voice didn't ask for trust. It simply carried its own. Caleb ate in silence, the food strange but good. Asha nodded once, then turned to go. Just before she stepped off the porch, she paused. Without turning back, she said, "This land was empty because no one could hold it. We came to see if that's still true." When she disappeared into the barn, Caleb stared after her for a long time. Later that night, he walked the boundary again. The fence was straight. The animals settled. The wounded man still breathed. But when Caleb stood at the edge of the field and looked back at the house, he didn't just see his home. He saw a line being drawn. Not between him and them, between them and the world. And he wasn't sure yet which side he stood on. The days stretched into one another like braided rope, tight, functional, and quietly strong. The ranch, once defined by silence, now held a rhythm. Not noise, not chaos. Just the kind of sound that comes from people who know work and how to do it without wasting breath. They repaired the chicken coop. They cleared the dry creek bed. Someone Caleb suspected, Tula, the sharp-eyed one, began restoring the smokehouse without ever speaking to him. It wasn't defiance. It was survival. These women weren't guests. They were settlers of a different kind. They didn't ask for room. They made it. Caleb noticed things. Ma, though the oldest, rose before dawn and boiled water like the morning depended on it. Mika took to the forge, reshaping dull tools with skill that came from pain and practice. Winona planted herbs outside the barn and marked the soil with stones and patterns Caleb didn't recognize. And Asha, she didn't hover, didn't demand. But wherever she was, Caleb knew it, like a change in wind before the storm. That morning, she walked beside him as he carried lumber toward the fence. "You replaced 3 posts last night," she said. He nodded. "You saw." "I hear." She paused. "Also, you mutter when you're frustrated." He grunted. "Not used to other people." "You were. Once." It wasn't a question. He set the plank down and straightened. "People leave." Asha met his gaze. Then they weren't staying for the right reason. They worked side by side for a while. The hammer in his hand felt lighter. The silence between them, warmer. That night, as the fire crackled low, Caleb stepped outside with his rifle. Not from suspicion, but from habit. He didn't make it 3 steps before spotting the figure sitting on the porch rail. Sani. She was the quietest of them all, and perhaps the hardest to read. She didn't speak when others did, but when she did, it always meant something. "There'll be men coming," she said without turning. "Soon." End of 2. Caleb frowned. "You see them?" "Number. But they're the kind that don't let women settle without paying a price." He didn't ask how she knew. Some knowledge came with the skin. He nodded once, then sat down beside her, the rifle resting across his knees. They said nothing more. But when Caleb went inside, he felt something strange, not dread, not fear. It was weight. The weight of knowing something was finally worth protecting. The first sign came as gossip. Caleb had only stepped into Havre for supplies: salt, lye, flour, nothing unusual. The general store was near empty, the stove cold, but the eyes of the few men inside were hotter than any flame. Grady, the storekeeper, greeted him with a nod that didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you got company up on that ranch." Caleb didn't answer. He placed his list on the counter and waited. "5 of 'em, isn't it?" Grady went on. "A whole damn camp of 'em. Women folk, wild ones. Makes folks uneasy." Still, Caleb said nothing. Roy Dinsmore leaned against a nearby shelf, arms crossed, grinning like he'd just stepped in something he meant to drag across your floor. "Funny thing," he said, "that land used to be Boone property, before he drank himself into the grave. Ain't nobody claimed it legal like since." "I'm on it," Caleb said. Roy clicked his tongue. "Living on it ain't the same." Caleb picked up the flour sack and turned to leave. "You might want to settle this before folks decide to settle it for you," Roy called after him. Outside, the air felt tighter. Even the sky seemed lower, clouds stitched together with a strange stillness. Caleb didn't ride straight home. He took the long path through the ridge where the old pines whispered things only wind and men with too much memory could understand. By the time he reached the ranch, the sun had begun to dip. From afar, the house glowed with warmth. Smoke curled from the chimney. Asha sat by the fence, sharpening a knife. Ma was hanging herbs by the window. They looked like they'd always been there. Inside, the stranger still lay resting, his breath stronger now. Caleb checked the bandage without comment. Then, he opened the drawer where he kept his deeds. Empty. He'd never needed one. He'd claimed the land the way old mountain men did, with work, sweat, and years of silence. But men like Roy weren't looking for fairness. They were looking for excuses. Later that night, Caleb found Asha on the porch again, watching the darkness beyond the pasture. "You heard them," she said. "Yes." "You afraid?" "Number. Should be." He looked at her. "You?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." In the distance, a coyote called once, then fell silent. Caleb stared into the blackness past the fields. "They're not coming tonight," he said. "But they will," she replied. And they both knew whatever came next wouldn't be solved with words. The wind changed that night. Not in speed, but in tone, no longer the clean whistle of open plains, but something scratchier, as though it dragged through teeth. Caleb woke before dawn, not from noise, but from instinct, the kind of stirring that tells a man something is wrong before his eyes even open. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, boots crunching lightly on frozen earth. The barn door creaked in the wind, swinging slightly off its hinge. That alone would have been nothing. except Caleb had latched it tight the night before. He moved slow, eyes tracing the ground. The snow was thin now, mostly thawed to mud. But just outside the chicken coop, he found a boot print too narrow for his, too large for any of the women. And deep. Whoever it was had stood there a while. No eggs were stolen, no fence cut. But the message was clear. They had been watched. He didn't speak of it until breakfast. The women sat around the small table, eating in silence. Ma sipped broth. Tula worked bread dough in her palms. Asha leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. There was someone here last night, Caleb said. Didn't come to steal. They looked at him, but didn't react with surprise. They're measuring, said Mika. Testing boundaries, Ma added. Sani stood and walked to the window. Won't be long before they stop watching and start deciding. Later that day, Caleb rode the perimeter. 3 wires had been snipped clean, low to the ground. Not damage. Precision. Mika found one of the bone knives missing from the tool wall. Winona's herb beds had been overturned. Not destroyed. Just tampered with. Asha retrieved the last of the arrowheads from a box near the forge and began fashioning new bolts by the fire. She didn't say why. No one asked. That evening, Sani dug a small pit beside the front gate and covered it with brush. Not a trap that would kill, just one that would remind a man where he didn't belong. They'll ride close soon, she said. Caleb nodded. And what will you do? He looked toward the barn, where the horses paced and snorted at nothing. Depends if they knock, he said. That night, as the wind howled louder, Caleb sat by the window, rifle across his lap, listening for anything that didn't belong. At dawn, he opened the door and froze. There on the porch steps, muddy and sharp, was a new print. Fresh, booted, human. It faced the door. Whoever it was had come all the way to the threshold and turned back. Not because they feared what was inside, but because they weren't ready. Yet, they came mid-afternoon, when the light was strongest and the shadows shortest. As if to say, we aren't hiding. 3 riders approached from the west, dust trailing behind like smoke from a slow fire. Caleb saw them before the dogs barked. He was mending a post by the south fence and didn't stop, just watched, measured. The first man rode tall, stiff in the saddle, like someone raised more by orders than by sun. The second chewed a toothpick like it was his last meal. The third, Roy Dinsmore, smiled, but not with his eyes. Caleb met them halfway between the barn and the porch. He didn't carry his rifle, didn't need to. His hands were enough. Afternoon, Roy said. Caleb said nothing. The first man spoke. We came to ask about your arrangement here. No arrangement, Caleb replied. They live. I live. Roy chuckled. Well, it's a curious thing, isn't it? 5 women, no kin, no papers, settling on what some folks still consider open land. It ain't open, Caleb said flatly. It's occupied. Sure, Roy said. But we got rules in Havre. Can't just let anyone set up shop without clearance. That sets a bad tone. Asha appeared behind Caleb, arms crossed, face unreadable. Behind her, Ma stepped onto the porch. Mika leaned on the rail, a short axe dangling from her belt. None of them spoke, but the message was clear. You gonna tell us what gives you the right to claim it? The first man asked. Caleb looked him dead in the eyes. Blood, work, time. The man's lip curled. You think this little setup here can stand against the town? I don't recall asking it to. Roy's hand drifted toward his saddlebag. Just a little. Enough to be noticed. Tula stepped forward from the barn with a shovel slung across her shoulder. That was enough. The first man clicked his tongue. We'll be seeing you again. With more than questions. They turned their horses without hurry, but without joy either. Men who came expecting fear and found something else, something steady. As their figures disappeared beyond the ridge, Asha stepped beside Caleb. You think they're bluffing? No, he said. I think they'll wait for the wind to change. Then they'll burn whatever's left. And us? We don't burn easy. That night, no one lit a fire. They didn't need heat. They needed silence. And in silence, they prepared. They struck again, but not with guns. Not yet. In the early hours before dawn, When the stars were still fading and the ground held the night's chill, Caleb found 3 symbols drawn in ash outside the barn door. Circles within circles. A broken line cut through them, sharp and final. A warning. A message. Not from nature, but from men. On the fence, someone had tied feathers hawk, raven, crow all facing inward. Someone had been close. Too close. They didn't come to kill, Ma said, staring at the symbols with calm eyes. They came to claim. Asha knelt by the marks. This is a boundary spell, she murmured, but one meant to erase, not protect. Mika spat on the ground beside it. Let's give them a boundary of our own. That afternoon, Caleb stoked the fire pit until the coals glowed white. He brought out the old branding iron once used for cattle, long since rusted. They shaped a new tip for it, 5 branches interwoven, bound at the root. Mika carved it from iron. Sani cooled it in snow. Asha polished it until it reflected firelight. And then, as dusk fell, they marked the ranch. The new brand burned into the center beam above the gate, smoke curling skyward like a signal. No one said a word. That night, Caleb watched the wind from the porch. Across the valley, flames flickered in the distance. Other camps, other watchers. Someone knew what they'd done, and they didn't like it. In the morning, Caleb found the brand coated in grease pig's fat, smeared thick, meant to rot and draw flies. Another message. He cleaned it in silence, reheated the iron, branded the beam again. 2 marks now, side by side. One to claim, one to resist. They want us to stop marking this place, Asha said. They want us to forget we belong here, Ma added. Caleb looked at them, then back at the glowing iron. Then we mark it again. And so they did, 3 nights in a row. The snow had gone, but the cold lingered. It clung to the windows and pressed into the bones of the house like an old regret. The land had thawed, but no one trusted it yet, not the soil, not the sky, not the silence that came when wind stopped moving. For 3 nights, they waited. Not because they were afraid, but because waiting is its own kind of war. Caleb walked the line at dusk. He did it every night now, a slow loop around the property, boots biting into thawed earth, rifle strapped across his back. He wasn't looking for signs anymore. He knew the signs. It was the feeling he chased now, that shift in the air. The moment when the stillness turned too clean, too careful. Inside the house, the others had found a rhythm. Ma brewed herbs with the patience of someone who'd buried husbands. Mika sharpened tools. Winona wrote in a book she never let anyone see. Asha walked the fence in the morning, in silence, fingers brushing the wood like she could hear it speak. No one asked when the men would come again, but everyone knew they would. It was Sani who saw them first, 2 riders in the hills, just beyond the East Ridge. They didn't come close, didn't wave, just sat there, like crows on a split rail, watching. Their marking time, she said, seeing how long we hold our breath. That night, Caleb found Asha sitting at the edge of the porch, feet bare against the cold wood. Her knife lay across her lap, not drawn, just there. They're not coming tonight, he said. She nodded. You sure? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on something he couldn't see, something far beyond the edge of the field. I used to live near this kind of waiting, she said quietly, where men decided your life was worth less than their pride. And they didn't come in rage. They came calm, prepared, like business. Caleb sat down beside her. Did they take something from you? A long pause. Then, number because I left before they could. Another silence. Only this one felt different. Not empty but full. Heavy with what hadn't been said. What about you? She asked. Caleb stared into the dark. They took everything, he said. But they did it one piece at a time. So I didn't notice until I was empty. Asha turned to look at him. You're not empty now. He didn't reply. But he didn't disagree. The next morning, someone had left something by the creek. Not trash. Not a threat. Just a single horseshoe. Polished, placed upright on a flat stone. A challenge. Caleb picked it up, turned it over in his hand. The iron was warm, fresh from a fire. Means they were close, Mika said, appearing behind him. Close enough to know we'd find it. They want us to come out. Or give up. They're going to be disappointed. That night, no one slept. Not for fear, but because sleep felt like surrender. They played cards by lantern light. Ma told stories that drifted into parable. Winona sang just one song, soft, a lullaby from a language Caleb didn't know. It made the walls feel thicker. Near midnight, the horses in the barn stirred. A sudden shift, no panic, just tension, like they'd caught a scent. Caleb went out with Asha, rifles in hand. They didn't see anything, not at first. Then, by the tree line, a flicker. Not a man, a match. Someone lit a cigarette out in the dark, just long enough to show they were there. Just long enough to prove they weren't afraid to wait either. Then nothing. The match died. The dark returned. Back inside, Caleb sat by the fire, staring into the flames. "You think they're trying to wear us down?" Asha asked. "No," he said. "They're trying to make us blink. And if we don't?" He looked at her. "Then they have to show who they really are." They didn't ride in loud. No banners. No war cries. Just the creak of saddle leather and the distant thunder of hooves over dry soil. Caleb spotted them at first light, 6 men on horseback, riding single file along the ridge. The way soldiers move, the way hunters track. Everyone saw. No one moved. By the time the riders reached the lower field, the ranch was already in formation. Moss stood by the door, arms crossed, her apron still dusted in flour. Mika stood near the forge, hands black with soot, but steady. Winona knelt by the herb beds, eyes down but ears turned toward the approaching danger. Sonny sat on the porch rail, legs swinging, a knife spinning slowly between her fingers. Asha was already beside Caleb by the time the riders dismounted. Roy Dinsmore was not among them this time. The new leader wore a blue jacket faded with age, brass buttons dulled by time. He had a face made for sermons, but eyes built for verdicts. "You've had our patience," he said. Caleb didn't respond. The man gestured behind him. "You are occupying land that has no legal deed, harboring women of uncertain status, and obstructing the natural order of this territory." Ma chuckled once. "Didn't realize God started issuing building permits." And the man's jaw tensed. Asha stepped forward. "This land was nothing before we made it something. And that's the problem," the man said. "You made it something that doesn't fit." Caleb's voice cut through. "We didn't ask permission. That doesn't mean we're giving it back." The tension was so thick, it seemed to hum. A hand twitched near a revolver. A boot scuffed the dirt. Then Sonny stood. "You fire one shot," she said, "and I'll cut down the first man who moves next." Ender. She wasn't yelling, which made it worse. The man in blue stepped forward, slowly, not toward Caleb, but toward the branded gate. He stared at the 5-branch symbol, still blackened from the last branding. "What does it mean?" he asked. Caleb answered, "It means we belong here. Together." The man touched the wood once, then turned back to his men. "We'll be back," he said. "With paper, with law." Caleb gave a short nod. "Bring whatever you need." And just like that, they rode off. Not in fear, not in defeat, but in retreat. For now. The dust they left behind settled slow. The silence returned, but it no longer felt like solitude. It felt earned. Caleb exhaled. Asha laid a hand on his shoulder. No words. Just wait. Behind them, the fire still burned in the stove. The house still stood. And 5 women watched the horizon not for rescue, but for confirmation. They were still here. The men never returned. Not in the way they had promised, with paper, or badges, or lawmen riding with dusty ledgers and loaded rifles. For days, the ranch waited, coiled like a spring. But when no one came, the tension didn't snap, it simply unwound, quietly, into motion. The women didn't celebrate. There were no shouts, no songs, no dancing under moonlight. That wasn't their way. Instead, they got up earlier the next morning. The forge was hot by sunrise. The herb beds were replanted with sturdier roots. The chicken coop got new hinges. The gate, rebranded a 3rd time. If the world outside the fence wanted them gone, it would have to try harder. Caleb, for the first time in years, stopped checking the windows at night. The man they had pulled from the woods finally opened his eyes. He didn't speak much, his voice barely a rasp, but when he did, He asked for Ma first. She sat by his side for hours, feeding him broth, telling him stories he likely didn't remember from when he was small. His daughters never left the ranch again. It was Asha who said it first, quietly, as she tied bundles of dried lavender for the rafters. "I don't think we're leaving." Caleb didn't respond. He was fixing the saddle girth with Sani, threading thick leather cord through steel. "You all right with that?" she asked. He paused, knife in hand. "I think I've been waiting for you longer than I've been alone." "Oh." That night, Asha sat on the porch with her feet tucked under a blanket, watching the stars break open the night. Caleb joined her, placing 2 cups of coffee between them. She didn't speak, but the slight lean of her shoulder toward his was answer enough. No one called the ranch by name. It didn't need one. The brand above the gate was name enough. Travelers came quiet once, respectful. They brought goods to trade, news to share, sometimes just stories to leave behind. None asked who owned the place. None were foolish enough to try claiming it. Word spread. They called it the place where the women stayed. The place where the man didn't ask them to leave. In spring, the soil softened under their hands. Crops grew. Trees budded. The creek swelled with meltwater, clean and cold and fast. New animals were born: chicks, foals, a litter of barn cats that Winona insisted on naming after old stars. Caleb wrote again, small notes, lists, but sometimes he let his pencil wander. In the back of an old journal, he scrawled 5 words under the page where his wife's name had once been the last entry. They stayed, and so did I. He never crossed out the old name, but he stopped writing only about ghosts. One evening, Ma found a box of seeds left near the gate. No note, just wrapped tight in oilcloth, with neat rows of wheat, barley, onions. It was a peace offering or perhaps an acknowledgement. Not all who watched from the ridge were enemies. Some were just men caught between the past and a future they didn't yet understand. The days grew longer. The women no longer locked their doors at night. Not because they forgot what danger felt like, but because they had changed what safety meant. They had each built walls in the world before they arrived here. Walls of silence, of running, of knowing better than to stay too long. But here among the timber, the fences, the slow breath of horses, they had built something different. Not a house, a home. Caleb didn't lead them, but they let him stand with them. That summer, a storm blew through and ripped half the roof from the barn. They rebuilt it in 2 days. Not because they were afraid of the next storm, but because they were finally living for what would come after it. They planted corn. Caleb started singing again, just short bits of old cowboy hymns while he worked. Asha laughed when she caught him off key, and for once, he didn't stop. Sometimes at night, Caleb still sat alone at the porch rail. The land stretched out before him unchanged, yet never the same. Behind him, the quiet murmur of women, tending to small things, the flick of a page, the soft clatter of mugs, the rustle of wind through linen curtains. There was no need to look back. Nothing he'd left behind could rival what stood in front of him now. And so, the ranch stood. Weathered, resilient, quiet, not forgotten, but chosen. Let me know if you'd like a final English language educational closing message like the Vietnamese version before, or if you'd like a polished, formatted manuscript with all chapters combined. Some places are not built for spectacle. They do not boast. They do not call attention. They endure. The ranch in Montana was such a place. Lonely, raw, quiet as a wound that never fully closes. It didn't promise salvation. It didn't offer escape. But for those who arrived, broken, exhausted, or simply needing somewhere to stand still, it offered the most precious thing of all, a chance to begin again. Caleb didn't go looking for them. The women didn't seek a leader. No one drew a map to this place. And yet, by some quiet grace, they found each other. They came not to be saved, but to survive. And then, slowly, to live. The lesson here is not about grand battles or bold declarations. It's about what happens in the quiet, defiant choice to stay. In a world that rewards running from pain, from responsibility, from the risk of belonging, these people chose otherwise. They stayed. They built something not with words, but with sweat, with care, with unspoken trust. They defended it not with violence, but with presence. And in doing so, they reclaimed not just land but identity, dignity, and a future no one else had planned for them. We often think strength is loud, but here, it wore no armor. It held no flag. Strength was a woman planting herbs after her fence was cut, a man mending a gate for people he didn't know he needed, a girl brushing a horse like she had always belonged. This is what community looks like at its rawest, its realest. A handful of people choosing each other, again and again, not because they must but because they can. In the end, it was not about who came, it was about who stayed. And what they grew, no one could ever take away.